Now we are going to begin chapter or unit 19, planning, zoning, and environmental hazards. Okay, there's 1% of the exam for the state would be on this lesson, and that'll be 1 out of 100 questions. Okay. So Florida's Growth Policy and Community Planning Act is called CPA. So there's a concurrency provision. Okay, and what this does is this is for the growth and this is for planning and infrastructure. So it says that water and solid waste treatment plants and sewer facilities must be in place before development can begin. So you can't develop an area unless the infrastructure to handle that area is there. That's what this is about. And the CPA placed growth planning responsibilities primarily with the local government. So they have the rules and regulations, but it's up to the local government to make sure everything is done. It's state mandated concurrency is not required for transportation, schools, and parks. Okay. It's also a downsized state growth plan. So they're basically designing the plan and it's going from the state down to them and they're going to regulate it. State regulates it, local, community, and planning enforces it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
So let's talk about what are city planning goals. So city planning and putting things in certain areas, industrial areas, there's a reason for that. And these are some of the goals. Okay, they save tax money by preventing sprawl, having things all over the place. It provides adequate provision of services, fire, police, EMS, everything like that. Provide for the road right-of-ways and setbacks, stoplights, things like that. Protects against costly drainage, flooding, and environmental problems, right? So if you have the right draining systems in and all that, you will not have problems later. And it reduces problems associated with existing landfills, prisons, hospitals, things like that, okay? So let's talk about what the Planning Commission is, okay? The Planning Commission is made up of a diverse group of people. They're appointed, not elected. It's a voluntary position. They do not get paid to be on the Planning Commission. There's an advisory board to the elected officials of the city or county. So the Planning Commission advises the elected officials. Okay, the authority of the Planning Commission is pretty strong, actually. The City Planning Commission often gives final authority on subdivision and plat approval. So if a development can go there, like they'll give the final approval on that. If you want to change zoning, things like that. Site plan approvals. So if they have a plan and they're going to approve it or make changes to it. Sign controls for stoplights, stop signs, yield signs, things like that. They also have a support staff. So they don't get paid to do the job, but their support staff does. They're full-time county or city employees. They're usually college or university trained planners. They have knowledge of how to evaluate the economic base of the city. And they have knowledge of the most productive sources of information, all the research and all the charts and things like that. They collect and refine the raw data. So they get all the census data and all that stuff, and they refine it and they put reports together. So let's talk about buildable lots and how you calculate the lots per acre. You remember the 43,560, right?
Yeah.
So 1 acre is 43,560 square feet. Okay. So I had problems about this. Like this was on my, I had 100,000 acres. How many square feet? Like it tells you 20% was, streets and roads. What's the minimum square foot per lot kind of thing. So I seen this actually on my exams. Something about this. So you have 43,560 square foot times the percentage of available lots. And that'll equal the square feet available for lots per acre. So the square feet available for lots per acre times the number of acres in a tract equal the total available square feet. The total of square feet available divided by the minimum square feet per lot will give you the buildable lots in a tract. So the question they're going to ask you is how many buildable lots are in a tract? And I had a question very similar to this. So let's look at this. A tract of land consists of 120 acres. Zoning requires 10,000 square feet per lot. 20% of this tract is to be set aside for streets and sidewalks. How many buildable lots are in the tract? Okay. So on this problem, you have 120 acres, right? You can do this two ways. You have 120 acres, okay? Times 43,560, right? So that's how many square feet you have, right? Minus 20%, right? Right? Because you got to take the 20% out, right? And then you divide that by 10,000. That's going to give you how many square feet, right?
I think you put in 120,000 acres, right?
Did I put too much? Yeah, hold on.
Yeah, just do 120 by the 43.
Yep.
Five.
So 100, you can do it that way too. So 120 acres times 43. I did do that. You're right. 43,560. That's why it didn't come up. It's 418 the answer. 43,560. That's your available square footage, right? So now you're going to take 20% of that away, right? Because you can't do 20% of that. And that's going to equal 4,181,760 square feet, right? And you're going to divide that by 10,000 square feet, right? So 418 buildable lots. You see how we did that?
Yeah, I saw it.
I put the wrong number in there. So here you go. 43,560. Now you can do it this way too. See, I did it the whole way and it's subtracted, right? But you could do it this way too. So you have 43,560. See, this is taking it 20% off of here, right off the bat. So 43,560 times 80% would be 34,848 per acre. See, they did it that way. So then you already took the 20% out. So now you take the 34,848 times 120 because the rest is going to be streets, right? And it gets you that same 4 million. It's the same number. It's just I went about it a different way. And then you take that 4 million divided by 10,000 and it's 418 lots. There's a little bit extra there. And there's your answer. I saw a question exactly like that, just different numbers on my instructor exam. Okay. So just so you're aware, you good with that?
Yeah. Whenever I take my instructor exam, then I'll know.
No, it could be on any. No, they all those exams are mixed. It's the same questions, just but it's on all of them. Did you have anything like that on yours?
I had something like this where it involved the percentages where they wanted you to figure out the total area and then they took a percent away like this. Pretty similar.
Yep.
I definitely prefer to solve these the way that we did rather than the way that
I like to do the whole thing and take it. That's just my brain, the way it works. Everybody's brain's different. So
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so let's go to zoning. Okay, local laws that implement comprehensive plans are zoning laws. They exercise police power. So that's how they regulate it. Okay. There's actual police power. They can be arrested. They can be fined, right? Okay, what do they regulate? It's permissible use of the land, lot sizes, type of structures, building heights, setback requirements, like what the parameters of where the properties can be, and the density. So can you put a 100-unit building in there? Is it too many people for the infrastructure? Things like that, right? Are they single family homes? Are they multifamily homes, right?
And then the density, is that related to the land itself and how?
No, the density is the amount of people per acre. Like
okay.
like some places you got to have one house per acre. Some houses, some is one per 10,000 square feet, right? It just depends on where you are. The density is how many people are in that area.
Is that like on a floor basis, like, or how does that work?
Yeah, no, I think it's just a volume, like a volume basis. Like for example, Brickell down in Miami is the most dense zip code in the country. There's so many high rises. There's so many people in that area. It's more than like Manhattan. because there's so many people,
Gotcha.
okay?
It's like, say you have a square mile, right? And the density from the zoning only allows like one gas station for every quarter mile. You can't have more than 4 gas stations. And that's one of the points of zoning. There's permissible uses of the land.
Gotcha.
How many acres in a square mile?
How
Or
many
how many-
acres?
Yeah, how many
Okay,
acres?
35, 50.
No,
Wait,
no, no.
what?
How many acres in a square mile? Remember when you got to figure out the vision? How many
Okay,
acres
okay, give me a second. How many acres
in a
per
square mile?
square mile?
In a section. Remember the section that gets divided up?
Yeah, 36.
No, 64. No, 640. 640.
Okay, yeah, 640.
Right?
Yes,
Each section is a mile by mile inside
Yeah.
inside the township, right?
yes.
But you gotta go 640 divided by 4 divided by 4 divided by 4, right? To get the
Yeah, 640. Yeah,
640.
640.
Yep.
I got confused on that one, but I definitely know the
I
640.
just like to
and
throw it in
the
there
36.
to remind you. Yep.
Yeah, and the one by one.
Yep. Residential zoning. It regulates the density. The subcategories establish minimum lot sizes, and it limits the number of units per acre. So, like for example, outside West Palm Beach, there, Lakahatchee, you got to have one house per 10 acres. So 10 acres in one house, right? That's just the way it works. So, everything's different. In the city, it's one house per 10,000 square feet, right? So it just depends what it is. Other zoning classifications. Commercial regulates intensity, which is traffic, right? So if you need to when a Walmart goes in, they got to put stoplights and all kinds of widen the roads, right? There's buffer zones. So if you ever notice when you have a bunch of industrial, there's like green space, and then there's a development, right, of houses. It's called a buffer zone. It's a strip of land separating one use from another. So it's not all combined in. Industrial regulates intensity. Agriculture use. You have agriculture as well. You have special use, which are government property, city hall, government buildings, things like that. So these are different types of classifications.
Question.
Yep.
On that last one.
Yep.
Nice. On the buffer zone, are they always government owned properties?
It's just strips of land. Doesn't have. I mean, usually it's part of the planning. So when you buy the land, you're making something that's usually owned by the person that has the businesses, but it's a buffer zone. Nothing can go in it, or the government may own it. It just depends. It could be privately owned. It could be publicly owned. It just depends. There's no rule to it. It's just there's a zone where nothing can be put.
Gotcha. Has it ever been the case that, let's say that there's a part of town where, let's say that there's 4 property owners and 3 of them decide to just make business on their property, and now the 4th one has to be the buffer zone?
No. That nothing like that. A buffer
Okay.
zone will be between an industrial and a residential neighborhood. A buffer zone will be between a football stadium and where people live, right? There's a buffer zone around things.
Okay.
And that's just for intensity and density. They separate them just for, like you ever notice, like you have a big church somewhere and there's like areas around it, or
Yeah.
like a big Amazon warehouse and there's like area around it before it gets into houses.
Yeah.
That's the buffer zone.
Okay.
Okay. If you have an area and there's 4 businesses, you can put another bit as long as it's zoned for that, right?
Gotcha.
So let's look at the building codes. Okay, building codes are put in place to protect public health and safety from inferior construction practices. So there's minimum standards for materials and quality of workmanship, sanitary equipment, electric wiring, fire prevention. There's minimums of what you have to use. Okay, there's a statewide Florida building code. The R values for insulation, the wind loads, it has to be able to handle so much winds because of the hurricanes. Okay, all these building codes are put in effect by the state. Now the codes are enforced by the local cities, right? They have the building inspectors, You got to get building permits, building inspections, certificate of occupancies. You're building a new home. You got to get a CO approved before the people can move in. Right?
CO?
Certificate of occupancy. It's called a CO. They got to come in, make sure everything's working, sign off on it, then they can move in. Okay.
Gotcha.
So all that's done by the city. It's set up by the state, done by the city, like enforced by the city. You want to build something, you gotta get a building permit. You want to fix something or turn it, put a restaurant in, permits. You got to get inspections. They come out and make sure everything's done right. Right.
Gotcha. Even if you fix it up yourself?
Yep. Absolutely.
Okay.
Zoning Board of Adjustment. Okay. There's two types of appeals and requests for relief. You need to know these because you may see something on these. There's something called a variance. Okay. A variance permits minor deviation. So if there's a rule and there's a hardship, maybe because the way the land is, you need to move a fence somewhere and it's over the line for where it needs to be for the setback, you can go and get a variance. The board has established criteria for past cases like that. And you go in, you ask for a variance. If they give it to you, you can do it. Okay. It's like a small variation of deviation of what you can do. There's a special exception. Okay. This is separate use for a specific partial. So if this partial is used for something and you want to use it for something else, you can apply for a special exception. If they give it to you, you can do it. If they don't, you can't. Okay. Like I had a piece of land, a residential piece of land we sold. Okay. And the land was zoned for up to 2 units. They wanted to put 4 units on it. So we put it under contract. They went to the city to get a special exception to make it for 4 units. Well, the city let them do 3, not 4. And they still bought it because they did 3. That's in a special exception. They didn't have enough parking area for a 4th.
Gotcha.
Okay. That's an example. Now, you also have something called legally non-conforming use. This is a change in zoning code that causes a property to no longer be conformed. And it's grandfathered in. So for example, if you own a bar on a corner and that bar has been there 100 years, okay, and they put a school across the street, you can't have a bar 100 feet from a school. However, if that bar was there before the school, it would be legally non-conforming use because it's grandfathered in. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, yeah.
That's called legally because non-conforming means you can't do it. Legally non-conforming means you have it grandfathered in, and there was a special reason because that happened like that, right? Okay, so let's talk about developments of regional impact, DRIs. Okay, any development that because of character, size, or location will have a substantial effect on health, safety, and welfare of citizens of more than one county. There's statewide guidelines and standards, shopping centers, malls, attractions, and sports facilities, football stadiums, Disney. People come from multiple areas. Outlet shopping malls, people come from all over. That's DRIs. They have impact because people come from other counties there, right? That's an example of a DRI. A planned unit development, a PUD. That's any development you see. Remember lot and block? Any development, you gotta submit the plan. So planned unit developments, what they're made up of, there's a special zoning use. They're called clustered homes. So they're higher density, like you'll have a bunch of townhouses, a little green area, a bunch of condos, a green area, some single family homes, a green area, a park, right? Inside these developments, you go in, sometimes a golf course, right? They're higher density because the houses are closer together. There's large green spaces between the clusters. So you have a bunch of townhouses and green space, a bunch of park, things like dog park, things like that. There's mixed land use. There's single family homes. There's multifamily townhouses and apartments, and sometimes condos. And some of them even have a retail and office facility. Like when you go in there, there's like a little strip mall, pizza shop, and little like hardware store, like stuff like that, and a little thing there, sandwich shop. They'll have like a little retail space for the community, like people can go to a little convenience store, things like that.
Got it.
And they have these planned open spaces. So there's little park areas in between the houses and things like that. So it's like a little development. That's a PUD. Now let's talk about the National Federal Flood Insurance Program. Okay, the National Flood Insurance Program is NFIP. Okay, there's insurance available to owners, tenants, and businesses if the community participates in an NFP. Participating communities agree to adopt and enforce ordinances that meet FEMA's requirements to reduce risk of flooding. So they have requirements. So you got to keep drains clean. You got to keep trees cut. You got like there's things that the areas have to do. And as long as they do that, that area is allowed to get flood insurance. Flood insurance is issued through FEMA. Local insurance companies sell it, but FEMA is the ones that back it. Okay. So the government backs that. So insurance is purchased through insurance companies backed by FEMA and administered by FEMA. So there's something called flood insurance rate maps. So FEMA prepares flood insurance rate maps. They're called firms for every city in the country in the US, or every city and county in the US. They identify flood zones on the firm as low risk, moderate risk, and high risk. So you can go to FEMA's website, put in a zip code, and it'll bring it all up, no matter where you are in the country. And it tells you low, moderate, or high. Tax sheets also tell you if it's a flood zone or not when you're looking at the properties. Flood insurance, okay? High risk areas are identified as 1, special flood hazard areas, SFHAs. They're located in a 100-year floodplain. And the high risk flood areas are A zones on the firm. So if you see on a tax record or on the map, an A zone, that's a high risk flood area. And then also there's also high risk coastal areas, coastal land located in the SFHAs. And you'll see them on the map, they'll be zone V on the firm. So buildings built in V zones must be elevated and anchored to protect against impact of waves, hurricane force winds, and erosions. If you ever notice the condo buildings on the beach, they're up, like they're raised up in the ground and then they're attached to the ground. Like if you ever notice they're up higher and the beach is always down, like they built that up and the beach is below it. That's because it has to be. That's a zoning thing. And that's a flood zone thing. Okay, so you have zone A, that's a flood zone that's not on the beach, and zone V is on the beach, right?
Got it.
And let's talk about mortgage loan requirements. So lenders review the firms. So they're going to look, when you go to buy a house, they're going to see if it's in a flood zone. If the structures are located in A zones and V zones that are financed with federally regulated or insured lenders, they're required to have flood insurance. So if you're in an A zone and you got financing, or a V zone and it's a federally related mortgage, they must have flood insurance. They don't have a choice. Now, flood insurance is available for property located in low risk and moderate risk areas that participate in the NFIP. Okay, so it's cheap too. If you're not in a flood zone, you could pay $300, $400, $500 a year and have flood insurance. Now, when Hurricane Ian came through and flooded all those homes, if those people would have just paid $300, $400, $500 and had flood insurance, everything would have been covered. A lot of them didn't. They weren't covered because insurance doesn't cover flood.
Yeah.
Right? So in Florida, I always recommend people, even though you're not in a flood zone, pay $300, $400, $500 a year. It's like going to dinner a couple times a year to protect your house, right?
It is.
And let's look at the environmental hazards. Okay. What you need to know about these. Asbestos. It's a mineral fiber that was used until 1978. That was put into the concrete to harden it. Radon. It naturally occurs. It comes from the ground. Limestone. Lead paint. Used before 1978. So just remember, lead paint, asbestos before 1978, right? Asbestos until 1978, lead paint before 1978. Mold, many types are harmful to humans, many are not. There could be mold problems. Water supply. You either have private wells or septic systems, or your public water and sewage, right? So that's your 2 types of water supplies. And WDO, wood destroying organisms. That's termites. When you get a house done, you do inspections. You get that checked when you do an inspection. We'll talk more about that later. All right. And that's that. That is the last section of Unit 19.